there's a set of ways of being that if the same thing happened to two different people, one person might survive it much differently than another person, right?
Right.
And what I think we find so often when this goes badly, when it doesn't work out for us, instead of being resilient, being okay, really having a ton of self-love, and even though we know it's going badly and it's not what we would choose, really being okay with it and doing what it takes to get through it, instead it feels like we're literally falling apart.
Are you listening?
This is the Rob Scott Show.
Damn.
I mean, really, like, if we're not trying to change the world, what are we doing?
Yeah.
All right, welcome to the Rob Scott Show. I'm here with Sarah. Sarah, how you doing?
Good. It's great to see you, Rob. Glad to be back.
Good to see you. I'm excited to do this. What are we going to talk about today?
Yeah. So today, let's go ahead and address something that I think most of our listeners will deal with at one point in their lives or another, which is kind of an unexpected or a bigger life event. Which is really broad, but let's try to get really specific. We've been asking you guys to write into us and kind of let us know what you've been thinking about and what you want to talk about. So we've been listening to kind of some of the things that you guys have been going through, and we want to address as much as we can and see what we can do to help you.
Let me say that a little differently. So it's like a big life event could be, getting married or pregnant. When we do a lot with identity shifting, and there's natural things that happen that shift our identity. So if you're not a parent and you become a parent, that's a big event, and it's kind of like an identity shift. If you get sick and all of a sudden get cancer or something before you were, not a cancer person, let's hope you survive it. You become a cancer survivor. That's a bit of an identity shift. I think what we're talking about here more than that is when life like pulls the rug out from under your feet, right? And this is, it's important because none of us are immune to this. This happens. It doesn't matter how awake you are. It doesn't matter whatever, but sometimes life will just punch you directly in the face, right? Some big emergency will happen. So we've written down some examples of these. And so,
I think it could be an unexpected, maybe a death of a family or a friend. So whether that's maybe a car accident or, just something unexpected, right? Something where someone doesn't die of old age in their bed. So,
or even dying, somebody you care about dying of old age or whatever. So
right.
death in the family.
Death.
Right.
It could be being cheated on, having your heart crushed, having your heart pulled out of your chest. It could be a financial setback where your car breaks down and all of a sudden you have to spend a lot of money. You've got a leak in your roof or something like that. And I will share, without too many details, is I'm working on a surprise change in my living situation that I wasn't expecting.
Right.
So, and I was just talking to one of my friends and I said, planning is great and it's helpful and it's useful, but as long as we're alive on planet Earth, chances are like there might be something that kind of comes into your life that you have not expected.
Yeah.
And that all the planning in the world doesn't expect, because it's hard. How do you plan for the unexpected? I guess
I'll match you, right? And you're very aware, but I don't know that the listeners are. I have a property in South Philadelphia that I rent out, and it's got a couple units in it, and it's had this persistent roof leak that has just been incredibly difficult, really expensive. Now, rightfully so, I think the tenants are deciding to move out. I'm actually going there tomorrow morning to figure it out. It's been such a bother. A huge financial cost where, we've had to fix things and then fix them again and then fix something different. But besides that, it's a time bother, right? It's a huge time bother. And so sometimes life just doesn't get into the flow for us, right? If we have our heart broken, you can be down and out for months or even years where you don't really feel like yourself, right? It's really getting hit out of left field. If you do, let's say you get sick yourself, and
right.
You're a business owner, or you're an employee, and all of a sudden you can't perform it the same way. What do we do? How do we build up the resilience to recover from this? How do we prepare for this ahead of time? Like, what do we do to deal with when life hits us in the face? And I would love to hear back from people if you've been hit in the face. Like, what are you dealing with? Like, what's going on for you? Just so we can all kind of rally and support each other, et cetera. So I think that if we were to describe how we want to be when something, like, by the way, do we have any others that come up?
Well, one that comes to mind is I was at Starbucks yesterday and I was pulling into the parking lot and there was a lady just sitting. She had a nice, I think it was like a Lexus or something. It was a fairly nice car, sitting in her morning, drinking her morning coffee. Maybe she's checking her email or on the phone or something. And I watched this van, this big like white plumbing van, no reason that I could tell, just plows into her. And I like watch it happen. And I thought, that is an unexpected way to start your day. You're like sitting in your car parked and another car just, they both had damage. And I thought, she got out of the car and they seemed to have a really reasonable conversation. Nobody was yelling. Everyone had paperwork out. But I just thought, like, every day when you get out, if you're just drinking your morning coffee, checking your email, like someone could run into you.
Totally. Like, or your car breaking down, or, you know, all the different kind of stuff, losing your job, all of these things can be completely overwhelming. And so how do we want to be when these things show up for us? Like, what would you describe somebody who's capable of like dealing with that? Right.
Well, I think you'd want to have control over your emotional facilities. And we talked before about people that, you know, aren't clear on their values. And so they react in a way they don't know what matters. And it's like an unreasonable reaction. Like, I think in that sense, if something happened to me out of my control, I'd want to be able to manage my emotions. Right. And I'd also want to have the clarity to know what to do next, right? Because when we don't plan for something and something happens, we can either freeze or we can take action. And sometimes it's hard to know. Also the ability to kind of be resilient and bounce back, right? So how can I just sitting in Starbucks, my car got hit. How can I still like save the rest of my day? How can I still get to work, pick up my kids, do all the stuff that you still have to do in a day when something kind of out of your control happens to you unexpectedly? And then how to kind of have peace about it, right? How to not let it ruin your time or ruin your relationship. If something bigger, we're talking about getting fired or getting cheated on, or, you know, somebody dying, like you still have the option to continue with life and not let it totally derail you. So that's let
me say this. So just to do it kind of more summed up, to give a sense of this, I think who we want to be is we want to feel mature, adult. We want to have, you know, good money habits so we can handle financial things that might come up. We want to be together enough emotionally so that we can go get the support we need, right? There's a set of ways of being that if the same thing happened to two different people, one person might survive it much differently than another person, right? And what I think we find so often when this goes badly, when it doesn't work out for us, instead of being resilient, being okay, really having a ton of self-love, and even though we know it's going badly and it's not what we would choose, really being okay with it and doing what it takes to get through it. Instead, it feels like we're literally falling apart, right? We hit this downward spiral. We end up self-sabotaging. We might lose confidence in a way that really affects not only not getting a raise, but we might lose our job because we're just so kind of caught up. We might have so many resentments. We might have self-hatred. We might start pointing the light back on ourselves and say, well, I'm just a loser. This, you know, somebody broke my heart, so I don't deserve love, or I wasn't good enough, or whatever those things are. We might get into a cycle of anxiety and depression, and ultimately just lose confidence. And so I want to paint those two pictures, right? Because life will hit you in the face. And I want to really have empathy for those that are presently going through it or have recently gone through it. I've certainly gone through it. It's something where life can be incredibly difficult. And you know, at last I checked, none of us really asked to be here. So we're given this huge responsibility to live life, try to live it well. And oftentimes, right when we think we're on top of it, the rug gets pulled out from under us. And we're now dealing with whatever that is. Again, sickness or job loss or whatever these things are. And so then imagine those two people. One is, to whatever degree, confident enough to deal with it, can have enough self-love to roll back their commitments and do really the minimal stuff so that they can probably like rest, right? I know when I've had my heart broken, I needed to rest. I needed to do less for a while so that I could recover from that. And that's not dysfunctional. I've got a new challenge. I've got new complexity in my life and I need to overcome it. And that's not when I'm going to be like charging the hill and taking on the world. It's maybe when I'm getting more introspective, I'm rethinking, I'm resetting my values. I'm doing
resetting your values. Definitely.
Right? So I think what I want to talk about is like, how do we address these tangible stresses, right? So stress in your relationship, when you feel like you can't perform at work, all of a sudden you're finding that you have loss of sleep, right? I've had times in my life where I couldn't sleep at all, right? I felt so unsafe in my world that my mind wouldn't let me sleep. And I was going in and out of like panic and anxious things, right? So this can affect our health. You can start eating really badly, right? To feel better, you can go right toward the sugar, and for
Right.
people right toward the drugs or the drink or the whatever. We start making unhealthy financial decisions, right? We
Right.
do things to feel better and spend too much. And again, I don't mean to keep talking about it. We might develop more persistent anxiety. So
Well, and it can impact our relationships with the other people around us, right? Because if we're
totally.
not our rested, healthy, secure self, how does that affect your relationship with your kids, your relationship with your employer, your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with your siblings, your family, like the relationship with the stranger that you bump into on the street? It can have a ripple effect, and I think that's kind of the scary part of the unexpected life events.
It can become a way of being, right? And,
Right.
an emotional moment, if it's carried on, it persists, and it can become like a personality trait. And ultimately, because we do identity shifting, right? It can actually become kind of a core meaning that you take on literally for the rest of your life if you let it, right? If you're not conscious about what's going on and you don't have the sense of self that we want to, help you have, ultimately you can start taking on these, quote unquote deficiencies or ways of being.
Right.
That lead to persistent anxiety, persistent depression, really feeling less about yourself. You can have a whole career change because you just didn't think that you could deal with it. And if you never fix that, it can affect the rest of your life. It can let your relationship deteriorate. You could lose your family. I mean, it can get really, really bad if you're not that version of the person that can deal with it and can overcome it, right?
Well, and to speak into, I mean, those are all like kind of reactive responses. But if say it's you gain indecision or anxiety, I mean, talking about the just missed opportunities, right?
Yeah.
So if you're not feeling secure, or maybe you don't go for that promotion, maybe you don't take that next step in your relationship, maybe you don't make that extra effort with your kids or something. So there's not only, I think, reactive things that happen where you're kind of obviously self-sabotaging, but I think you can also kind of quietly self-sabotage if you're stuck in that same way. And it all kind of leads to not where you want to be.
Totally. So I'm going to keep hanging hooks on those two people, right? That one person who is completely overwhelmed, their sense of self gets completely destroyed, et cetera, versus the person who's resilient, has it together, and what's going on. And if you were to compare those two people, there's three clear dimensions, right? If we start to talk about how do I become the kind of person that if I'm dealing with it now, I can recover faster. How do I become the kind of person that can deal with the future things that are going to come and be difficult, right? We could have a huge market correction where half of our wealth goes away, like what happened in 2007, 2008. And, that literally killed a bunch of people, right? It killed tons financially, but then, people, I'm sure, I don't have the data on this, but I'm pretty sure people took their life over it. It led to, disaster in a lot of ways for a lot of people. Well, if that happens again, right? How do we deal with that? These are cyclical things that may happen soon. They might happen in our life.
And they're out of our control.
And they're out of our control, right? There's systemic things that can affect us. And so how do we deal with that? And it's not just, make more money so that I'm less. It's really, how do you become the kind of person that can deal with whatever chaos and stuff, comes your way, right? They take soldiers and they, in whatever way, make them more capable to deal with chaos and be more resilient, et cetera. And so I think there's three useful dimensions to think about. Number one, we have to get past how our thinking goes. Like, how are we thinking about this stuff? If you think the same thoughts, right, however you are today, how do you expect to have a different result if you're just going to continue to think the same thoughts all the time?
Right.
You have to have emotional mastery. So how can you take depression and turn it into confidence? How do you take sadness and find the beauty in it, maybe even shift it into joy, right? Do you have emotional mastery, or do you just feel like a victim to overwhelming emotions when they come up for you? And I think the third dimension is, what are your behaviors? Not only your habits, but like, how do you choose to behave in the face of stress, overwhelm, et cetera? Do you just sit down and like watch TV, or do you have enough energy to go do the hard things? Maybe, begin to work out, take care of your own needs, cook your own food, whatever those things are, right?
Right.
Moves. So to sum up, how we think, how we feel, and how we behave make up what? It makes up our identity. It really makes up who you are. And if you want to become somebody different, you need to gain mastery over how you think, how you feel, and how you behave. Otherwise it's not going to work for you, right?
Right. And that's, those two people, the resilient person and the victim, because, and that's, I just think, like, if you are someone that's run by your emotions, right, then your thought is dictated by how you feel, and then how you behave is dictated by how you feel, then that becomes not the right balance. So it is really important to kind of address all three areas, but also know that all three areas are related. So if you struggle really, you're like, so I'm someone that's like very emotionally led, and when I get angry, I'm super angry and it ruins my whole day. And or, when I'm sad, nothing's good. And, like, just check in. And some people, maybe it's like, well, I have thoughts. I have like overwhelming thoughts, and that makes me feel anxious, and that makes me behave in an anxious way. And some people are like, my habits, my behaviors are not reflective, and so that makes me think poorly about myself, and then that makes me feel badly. So, like, it just is such an I love those three things, and they definitely do make up who we are. And there's definitely, like, it's a problem that can look the same across the board, but, like, there's different areas. It's helpful to break them down to different areas, because one changes the other, in an instant.
Yeah, totally. What's interesting is, the more unconscious we are, the more the Venn diagram of these three things tends to overlap, right? Because we're a holistic system, if we talk about any of the one parts of it, it changes all the other ones for sure, right? We know that. However, as we gain mastery over each of these areas, changing any one of them can affect the whole system in a really positive way. Ultimately, the more conscious we can be about these things, what happens is all of a sudden you can start to pull them apart and really see how they're different and gain mastery over each one, so that you can really repattern bad ways of thinking that are habitual and old. You can master your thought in the moment in a really powerful way. You can be with your emotions in this really powerful way, and you can set and keep habits in a whole new way, right? So if you're that resilient person, there's definitely a different way to relate to all that.
Yeah. And I think that what I kind of just to toot our own horn, and I know we're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy, and this isn't used in therapy, but looking at the personal development side of things is identity shifting is looking at identity itself and what it is, and being able to shift who you are in any one moment using those three elements is such a powerful thing on the personal development side.
Yeah.
And it's something that I often see missed, right? People are like, well, this is like, positive thinking, just think better and everything will be better. And it does, it affects that. Or just, feel better, or just do this one habit. And to what you just said, yes, it does, right? Because affecting one affects the other. But understanding, you said we're a holistic system, right?
Yeah.
So understanding that, like, all of those three, while they impact themselves, it's a balancing act for all of them. So you can't really discount or say, like, this is the most important part. Like, it really does kind of lean into each other. So I think being able to say, like, I have become a new person, not because I think a new thought or I do a new activity, or, and now I feel good today, so I'm, whatever. It's addressing, all three things at once is such a powerful transformation.
For sure. Yeah. I think of the three, starting at the root of your brain and your thought, like, there's no question, if you do a different behavior, it will change how you think. And so, like, if I'm down and I just decide to get up and dance, let's say, that will definitely change how I feel, and it'll probably change the thoughts that are firing, because now I'm doing a different thing. There's no question that doing that. But how did I even decide to do the different behavior, right? What was still the root of that was some thought. And so the thought is kind of home base, right? It is absolutely where we want to gain mastery, because without gaining some mastery over that, the rest of it is going to be very difficult to change, right?
Exactly.
If our thought is totally scattered and all over the place and anxious and overwhelmed, et cetera, it's going, our feelings are going to follow that for sure. Now, can you have a persistent emotion that no matter what you're thinking, that emotion is, deep and sort of set in? Your body can be set up and so triggered, and what's happening physically in your adrenal glands can just be kicking out stress hormones to keep you feeling stressed. Does that affect your thoughts? Absolutely. Does calming the body have a big effect on maybe calming your thoughts? Absolutely, right? So I'm not saying that thoughts are always first necessarily, but thoughts are the most immediate change, because literally if you change a thought, you're changing your reality to whatever degree. But what I also want to say is that there are more permanent shifts that we can do here, right? So one of the things that we talk about when we work with people that are clients is that we're not going to tell you what to think, but we're going to show you how to think differently. And that understanding, that learning is way more permanent than just an affirmation. So while an affirmation in the moment may actually move your attention, and in that moving of your attention, you feel better, right? Because now you're not thinking about how horrible things are. You've started to think about maybe something that's more positive. You may feel a more positive emotion, etc. But if you've got this subconscious pattern or, trigger system that doesn't really get altered, how long is that going to stay? All of a sudden you're right back, right?
Right.
But if you actually change how you think, how you make meaning to yourself, all of a sudden those root system thoughts don't come up to deal with in the same way. They don't have to be as negative. And that is a profound change in sense of self, right? And when you change sense of self, all of a sudden your persistent emotions can massively change, right? You can move from anxious and depressed to calm and confident,
right?
And your behaviors start to change, right? Because these things that you used to do behaviorally to overcome how you feel and how you thought, right? These trigger things that you were using, whether you knew it or not, to feel better or whatever, you have no need to do them in the same way quite often. And all of a sudden you're more interested in being productive and, not just consuming to feel better, but now you want to create and now you want to go do things and you might want to take care of your body differently and all that stuff. So while they're all related and there's no question, there's a bit of it that's maybe the first and most important thing to address is thinking. And then once you do that, really there is in the emotional realm specific things to do so that you can be more resilient in your feelings. So one thing, I used to really run from sadness in my life as an example. So one move in your emotional resilience is, can I be sad now and not have to change it, but just be with it? And
still manage your thought creation and your behavior.
Totally. But in the realm of just feeling sad, there's so much beauty in that, right? So if I don't run from that, there's things to learn, there's things to feel, there's beauty in that. Like grief is one of the richest, and this might sound like, okay, Rob, you've jumped the shark. Doesn't make any sense at all. But, grief itself, if you can be with it in a way that's resilient, I don't need to change that, right? I don't have to shift that. I can actually just sit in grief and actually have a lot of really rich experiences in that. And when you do that, your emotions will naturally pass through in a way that's really powerful, right? You can actually let them pass through and they will shift on their own. If we don't feel what's the natural reaction and emotion and we stuff it down, it will tend to persist because it will want to come through and be processed. So learning to stay with emotions is one thing. And then we also have the ability, as we gain more self-awareness and what's going on in the mind-emotion connection, we can actually shift things too. So if it's not appropriate to feel grief, I can actually move that around and decide literally in the moment to feel differently, right? There are ways to start shifting those. And certainly then shifting the patterns of feelings over time, et cetera. So anyway, that's down a rabbit hole there. But gaining mastery over thought, emotion, and behavior is the way that we turn into that more resilient person, for sure.
Well, and permanently, right? Because I think there's a difference between fixing something and really like true transformation and change. And kind of circling back to where we started, things in life happen that are outside of our control that we didn't plan for. You were saying that there's like cyclical things that happen to us externally.
Sure.
So the ability to feel better, think better, do better in the moment is of course something that's valuable, but to alter all of those to be more like resilience to me is permanent, right? It's not, I feel better or I change whatever, I have a new habit. Resilience is like, no matter what happens to you, no matter when that happens, like you are able to carry on through it. And so
it doesn't mean invincible. It doesn't mean you're perfect. It doesn't mean you won't have to if you get knocked out, you're going to need to lay down for a little while. You might need to go to the hospital. Like we're not talking about being invincible. We're talking about dialing up the ability to be resilient. Another way to talk about this that might make sense to people is if you become more of an adult, and I don't mean older, I mean more mature, right? If you take how a child deals with stress, right? If I talk to an 8 or 9 or 10-year-old child and I just take away their cookie, the whole world fell apart. Like it's in the world. But if you do that to an adult who's not addicted to sugar and going to freak, like a mature adult, it's like, well, you took my cookie. I don't have to assign a ton of meat. Like I can deal with that, right? So on that super silly level of resilience there, you can see the difference between a child and an adult.
Right.
What we're talking about with permanent resilience or more resilience, let's say, because again, we're not talking about being, infinitely resilient or indestructible or any of that stuff. We still feel it. And I have another point about that in a second, but we're talking about becoming more of an adult, right? And as you become more of an adult, now you have a more permanent sense of, I can deal with what comes, even all the way to the tough conversations about like the fact that one day we're all going to die. Like even I'm going to die. So how okay am I with that, right? Most of us don't want to think about that at all. It's the scariest thing in the world. But if you can actually get to the point where you can deal with that, well, then anything underneath that, however this life goes, is okay, because I ultimately know that, that's even going to happen and that's okay, right? But so many of us way before that make whatever's going to happen that's so scary such a big deal because we haven't made it okay that it can go bad. We haven't built a resilience where
right.
if it goes bad, I know I'm going to be, it's going to work out. However,
right.
Like, it's going to keep going. The experience of life is just going to keep going. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, there's so much here that we could talk about, but I think the thing is that in general, the way to become, you're not just a victim to this, right? In one sense, bad things are going to happen. So you will feel victimized at times, stuff's going to happen where maybe you quite literally are the victim, but emotionally, you don't have to just go, I'm so scared of life because this is going to be difficult. You can become more adult. You can become more resilient. And through that, it's really gaining mastery over your meaning making or your thinking, gaining emotional maturity and mastery, if you will, and then behavioral emotional mastery, or behavioral mastery to whatever degree over your habits and your choices and what you do in your thing. And when you do that, we specifically call that identity shifting because you've become a different version of yourself. You're no longer the 5-year-old version of you. If you're older than 20, you're no longer the 20-year-old version. You're becoming a new person all the time, but there's a conscious process that you can do to shift each of these. And when you do it profoundly, you become, the best, most idealized version of yourself that you can be.
At the time, yeah. Like at whatever you're going through. And I think when we say victim versus resilient, to me, I hear victim of yourself, right? Because there are going to be times in our life where we are a victim to whatever is happening. But where I'm like, where you guys as the listeners, me, Rob, everyone has the capability is that we don't have to be a victim to our own self, our own.
I love that. Yeah.
And our own thoughts and our own behaviors, because we are ultimately able to control that. So yeah, I guess that's a good distinguishment, because there might be some people saying, no, I am like this. I was a victim. This happened to me. It's like, yeah, don't become a victim of your own self, because that's not showing, good self-love or self-care.
It's almost like there's a fact on the board of I was victimized by something, right? That's true. In certain cases, that will definitely be true. But how do you respond to that? Do you respond to that as a continued victim and stay in that story?
Right.
Do you respond to that as a hero, or do you respond to that as an adult? Or, what's the way that you want to come back to once you're victimized by something, right? You've gotten fired unfairly. You've gotten a disease. Someone in your family's sick or has died, right? Your car got smashed. Something happened.
Right.
How are you going to show up and face that? And become more adult, more resilient, et cetera. To go do that on your own, start to realize that you can change how you think about stuff. You can either accept or change how you feel about things, and you can change what you choose to do. I think an underlying thing, I think I already said it, but I want to make sure that I'm soft with this, because I've gone through these many, many times in my life. I'm sure I'll go through more. Be gentle with yourself, right? There's a core of self-love here where I'm not saying that I should just be able to change everything. And like, it may hurt for a while, right? Grief hurts. There's no question about it. If you've had a huge loss romantically or something in your family's gone wrong, that might hurt for a really long time. Can you make that okay? Can you be in that hurt and be accepting of it and go, this is what life is right now. Because as we always talk about suffering is resisting what is. So if hurt is here, can you be with the hurt and accept it? Because if you're doing the game of, I wish it was different, I wish this would go away, I wish I could go faster, right? To whatever degree you're attached to that difference is the degree that you're going to be suffering.
Right.
So get rid of the suffering first. Then it is time to sort of look at that objectively and go, okay, what can I change? How can I change how I'm thinking about this, feeling, etc.? And I don't know, do you have anything more you want to say about that?
Yeah. No, that's great.
So, I think we'll leave you with that for now. We are going to be running a group pretty soon. So at the recording, depends on when you're listening to this, but if you're listening as soon as we put this up, we're going to be running an identity shifting group really soon. If you're interested in just applying for that or seeing what's available, because we have a home study version that people can get right now, or you can apply to be in that live group that we're running soon, you can go to identityshifting.com and learn more about what we're doing with that, and even apply to have a talk with someone on our team about joining the next group. Or again, you could sign up to do the identity shifting stuff yourself right now. So why don't we leave it there? I think that's a good talk. And again, if you are dealing with any of this stuff, we are sending good love and good energy your way, because we know that life can really sometimes
pull the rug right out from underneath you.
Right out from under you. You flip up in the air like an idiot and land directly on your head, and it hurts really bad. And not to make light of it, but really it can be really, really tough. And so deep bow, sending love and attention your way if you're dealing with anything like that. And I guess that's it. Have a great day.
Have a great day. Thanks, Rob.
You got it. Bye-bye.